involves several of the themes we have heard here tonight. We have drugs. We've mentioned drugs. We have skeevy men. That's involved. And we have junk. That'll work its way in there, too. So, my story begins in New York. Another tie-in. It was myself. It was my man at the time, Mike. And it was our desire to get some weed. We were sitting around and we were thinking about ways that we could get weed. Fast. Preferably free. Mike happened to know a guy. He happened to know his neighbor. His name was Walter. Walter had lived in his Upper West Side apartment for probably, no exaggeration, 35 years. He's a little older, a little portly, a little stately, and he wore a caftan. I'm not really sure if I have that right. I'm not really sure if I know what a caftan is. I'm thinking it's like a muumuu for men, am I right? I think so. That's what he wore. It was sort of like modeled and, you know, hippified, and he sort of strolls out of his apartment when we knock on the door to get weed. And he greets us, and he says, "Come on in." And he welcomes us into his backyard with a patio. And for anybody who lives in New York, the fact that he has a backyard and a patio on the Upper West Side tells you that at one time he was, like, important. He was in theater, which is great because we were actors. And we're always looking for that connection to somebody important, you know, somebody who can hook us up with the next show or something. And if he can give you weed, so much better. So we're sitting around, and he actually doesn't have any weed, but he does have Alizé. Does anyone here know what Alizé is? You remember that, like, cocktail came out, you know, this was, what, 2001, you know, a sunny time, you know, May, June 2001. Alizé had just come out, and they were just like that syrupy, cherry kind of flavor, you know, that thick liquid that you're supposed to mix with vodka or something. We didn't mix it with anything. He just had a bottle of Alizé that he poured really slowly into these 2 tall glasses. And we sat around on his patio drinking our Alizé, and it's sweet, and it tastes kind of like Dimetapp. And so we have this Dimetapp, and then he says he has hash. I'm like, well, that's better than weed. That's great. So he brings out this loamy little brick of hash, and he slices off a couple, and so we smoke the hash and we drink the Alizé, and I'm wrecked. That's when he decides that he wants to have some fun. Because if I had been paying attention, I would have noticed that he was not drinking the Alizé, and he was not smoking the hash. He was sober, and he was bored. So he says, "Oh, well, you guys are actors. I'm in theater. I have some costumes." I said, "What costumes?" He's like, "Well, what I have," and he brings out like a trunk. I'm not kidding. He has a trunk, and he has like a hat that's like a D'Artagnan hat, you know, like for swashbuckling if you're French and in the 17th century. And he brings it out, and he's got this plume on it, and he hands it to my friend Mike, and he puts it on Mike, and he says, "Mike, wear the hat." Mike, who looks a little like Burger from Hair, like all the time, is like, "Okay." And then he hands me a kimono, and he gives me the kimono, and he insists that I put on the kimono. He turns his back so he can't see. I don't know if he peeked, but because I'm completely wasted on hash and Alizé, and I'm confused, and I'm wearing his kimono that kind of smells like him. He says it was from an old girlfriend or something, but it smells like him. And so I'm wearing the kimono, and I'm looking at the plume, and he hands me something to recite. Yeah, he's got something to recite. He's got an article from 1975 from the New Yorker. And it's sort of like this whole thing on like East Coast versus West Coast, but it was like not very well observed. It was kind of like, well, you know, West Coast people say, "Let's do lunch." And East Coast people say, "Lunch? Well, we'll go and get some pastrami on rye. What's the matter with you? Do lunch?" Like that was the whole thing. So I read it and I can't like speak anymore, but I'm trying to do it in all these voices because he's important. He's in theater. He has a patio on the Upper West Side, and somehow this is all going to make its way back together. And so I'm doing this, and my words are stumbling together, and finally I'm like, I can't. The words are swimming on the page together, and I've got to get out of here. That's it. I've got to get out. So I'm like, can you please escort me out? I don't think I said it like that. And so I grab Mike in his hat, and and me in the kimono, and I'm trying to take off the kimono and put whatever I had else back on, and I sit down and I say, it was very nice to meet you. And he folds his hands and he sits down, and I look at his hands because he folds his hands, and there, below his hands, below the caftan, is the junk. Awkward pause.